let's try to study ischemic heart disease. I've tried to make it very concise and crisp, and I've tried to focus on the topics which are very sometimes become very confusing. Like we get confused between what is angina, how is it is related to ischemic heart disease, what is my heart attack, what is non-STEMI and STEMI are different from heart attack. Like what is it? Like we get very confused. So I've tried to incorporate those terms, and we will try to understand that what are they first, and then we will move on to treatment part.
Okay.
So yes, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Rahul Jain, and these sessions are happening under the guidance of Dr. Sharda Jain. So moving on to the first slide. So yes, this slide is very simple, but it is very important. So what is it? So first is ischemic heart disease is of two types. That is acute coronary syndrome and stable ischemic heart disease. Under stable ischemic heart disease, we have only one entity called as angina. And under acute coronary syndrome, we have three entities. So whenever we say heart attack, we actually mean by this term acute coronary syndrome.
Okay.
So a heart attack can be STEMI, non-STEMI, and unstable angina. So STEMI is ST elevation myocardial infarction.
Okay.
And NSTEMI is non-ST elevation myocardial infarction.
Okay.
So very simple. And then last is unstable angina. So yes, we will also read that what do they mean and why these terms. So first is we just need to remember that ischemic heart disease is of two types: stable and unstable. I can say acute coronary syndrome. And this is the term heart attack comes into the picture. And then a heart attack can be STEMI, NSTEMI, and unstable angina. So moving on to the next point.
I came to know about these terms for the first time today.
Yes. So first is pathogenesis. So actually why whatever the heart is going under ischemia. So the disease, the heading was IHD, that is ischemic heart disease. So the name only suggests that heart is suffering a disease due to ischemia, and ischemia in small sense is basically the heart is getting no oxygen supply or less oxygen supply. So why there is ischemia? So the concept is very simple. So the concept is, if I compare it with money, that if I say a person doesn't have money, so there can be two reasons behind that he doesn't have money. One is he's overspending a lot, or he's not getting any money from he's not producing any money. So that's how the heart's oxygen or the blood supply is, that either there is no demand, either there is increased demand, or there is no supply. So that mismatch can happen in multiple conditions, and we need to know those conditions, because this is the point which we are trying to avoid in any heart patient. Because if any point of the time they suffer from either increased demand or decreased supply, they will go for ischemic heart disease.
Correct.
So first very important point is, it's actually a very interesting point, that heart supplies the blood to the whole body during systole. It's a well-known fact, but heart itself receives blood supply only during diastole.
Correct.
So whenever the heart pumps the blood, the whole heart contracts. So the vessels also inside the heart, they collapse. But when heart relaxes during diastole, those arteries get filled with blood. So it is a diastole where the heart is getting the blood. So now how it is relevant to us is that first of all, whenever there is normal duration of my cardiac cycle is 0.8 seconds for the heart rate of 75 beats per minute, 0.8. In this 0.8, if I split it under 0.5, that is duration of diastole, and 0.3 seconds, that is duration of systole. So if we can, it is always the diastole which shortens first whenever there is increase in the heart rate. So the moment someone's heart rate from 75 becomes 100, the duration of cardiac cycle will become 0.6 seconds.
Okay.
It is basic maths that when heart is beating more number of times in a minute, so each beat will be a shorter time.
Correct.
So the moment it becomes even more shorter, the duration is the the time which is being taken more is from diastole, because diastole is longer, and so it is the heart's own supply which is getting affected more. So anytime heart goes on the tachycardia, and also when it is contracting more, or whenever there is exercise, any tachycardia, the demand of the heart will increase, the demand of the oxygen from the heart. So this is the first point. So why I'm saying this, because if anyone has suffered ischemic heart disease or someone is complaining of chest pain, we need to make sure that they don't panic, so that they don't go under tachycardia. Then second point is hypertrophy. Obviously, whenever the heart muscle will become thick, it will require more muscle, and hypertension. We have already discussed this, because heart has to pump against the high blood pressure. So, okay. Then third point is what are the places where the supply will decrease. So narrowing and anemia. So many times it happens that this narrowing is basically when we talk about all the risk factors, increased lipid levels, increased blood pressure, increased sugars. This is the narrowing we are talking about. So many times it happens that person will be suffering through all these risk factors. The heart arteries have narrowed, so the supply has decreased, and one day he starts fighting with someone at home, undergoes emotional stress or anything which causes tachycardia, and suddenly he goes into the chest pain and heart attack. So now we can relate why this is happening. So, and then obviously if a patient suffers from heart disease and he has anemia, so anemia can cause, will not be able to supply enough amount of oxygen. That will also cause supply decrease. So any patient with anemia has to be addressed, if it's elderly especially. We should not ignore their anemia. So now this narrowing, I'll discuss a little more that how this narrowing is happening. So this narrowing is basically because of something called as atheroma or atheromatous plaque formation. So in brief, I'll just discuss this, that we all have something called as fatty streaks in our vessels. Even if I take a 10-year-old child, that child will also have fatty streaks. Even if I take a 80-year-old individual, that person will also have fatty streaks inside the vessels. So, but the number will be less in a case of a child. So these fatty streaks are basically the point where all these they are the nidus of all this atheromatous plaque formation. But that plaque won't get formed unless the person is suffering from hypertension, increased lipid levels, and diabetes.
Okay.
So this is where the role of all risk factors come into the picture.
आपने ये वो मक्खन वाली कहानी सुनी है? जब आपको मक्खन निकालते हैं तो जब रगड़ते हैं उसमें, तो कहते हैं जब मक्खन निकलने का टाइम आ जाता है तो थोड़ा सा उसमें मक्खन डाल देते हैं, तो सारा अंदर का जो भी मक्खन है वो उसमें चिपक जाता है, ठीक है, और फिर छाछ बच जाती है. So this is what the role is the body is also playing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So this plaque again is of two types. So now this is where this picture will come into the become very important, that this again, the abnormal plaque which has formed over those fatty streaks can be a stable plaque or can be a vulnerable plaque. So I'll just go back and show this, that this stable ischemic heart disease has something called a stable plaque. The type of plaque is stable plaque, and the other three, the acute coronary syndrome, has something called as vulnerable plaque.
Correct.
We will discuss them more. So yes, now this is the picture I want to show. What is the difference between stable plaque and a vulnerable plaque? So suppose someone has maybe mildly, they have controlled hypertension, lipid levels, and diabetes mellitus. All three are controlled, but they are present in that person. So there is this thing called a stable plaque formation. So basically, when I talk about a plaque, there are three components of a plaque. So this is something called a lipid core, you can see. Then there is overhead this lipid core, there is something called a fibrous cap, and in between we call something called a shoulder. It is not being labeled. This here maybe shoulder of the plaque. So if the content of the plaque is really rich in lipid core, the lipid core is too huge, then it is called as, and the fibrous cap is very small, it is called as vulnerable plaque. And if the lipid core is very thin and the fibrous cap is too thick, it is called a stable plaque.
Correct.
So whenever there is hypertension, which is maybe any vessel injury for that matter, which damages the fibrous cap, in this case, in the stable plaque, it won't be able to expose the lipid core. But
Correct.
in case of vulnerable plaque, the moment it breaks the fibrous cap, the lipid core will get exposed to the blood, and as ma'am said this story, that it will immediately start depositing all the platelets, all the lipids already in the blood, and immediately will start developing complete occlusion. But in stable plaque, the condition does not happen like that. So again, I'll mention here that this diagram is very important, that stable ischemic heart disease, the patient has narrowing, that's all. The patient won't, only is symptomatic whenever they're doing exercise. But they won't be symptomatic at rest because there is never complete occlusion. But in case of vulnerable plaque, first of all, the occlusion is more than the stable plaque, and also anytime this vulnerable plaque ruptures, fissures, or undergoes ulceration or any injury to that fibrous cap, it will go for complete occlusion, and where we can get a picture of like a STEMI and unstable angina. So I hope this is clear that how vulnerable plaque and stable plaques are important, and we need to, this is where all the risk factors come in the picture.
Yes, it's very important.
So this is also a point where the people who are anxious or the people who are type A personalities will have higher heart rates. So then, yes, I have one more point here is that now I have not mentioned stable plaque. We have only discussing vulnerable plaque. That is the figure I'm starting from ACS. So this vulnerable plaque, which is part of acute coronary syndrome, can either cause partial artery occlusion or can cause complete artery occlusion. So immediately, if complete artery occlusion is there, we call it ST elevation myocardial infarction.
Correct.
And the partial artery occlusion, there are two possibilities. The one possibility is that it's there if the heart muscle is injured, then I call it non-ST elevation MI. And if the heart muscle has somehow managed not to die, then it is only ischemia, and then I'm calling it unstable angina. So this figure and this figure, they are very, very important. So once we are clear, at least the terminology should be clear, and when we take a history of the patient, anyone giving heart disease history, we should make sure that which was the exact disease they suffered from. So obviously suffering from ST elevation MI and suffering from unstable angina, both have very different prognosis. One is only ischemia, while one is complete artery occlusion, and one is full infarction. So moving on to this simple one more thing, that now I can obviously differentiate between angina pectoris and acute coronary syndrome on the basis of history, that the patient is symptomatic or asymptomatic at rest. So patients of angina pectoris will normally come with chief complaints that they are symptomatic, but that symptoms only come of chest pain when they walk a lot or when they are doing exercise.
Correct.
So this should, and they will moreover have the history that their hypertension, diabetes, and lipids are well controlled on the drugs. So I know that it is a case of angina pectoris, and I need not worry at that point. And then my investigations follow that route. But then, if I suspect any patient with acute coronary syndrome, then I need to make sure that how the patient will immediately come that the patient is experiencing chest pain, and we'll read more clinical features. Then I need to differentiate at that point that is it ST elevation MI, it is just unstable angina, or it is non-ST elevation MI. So how will I differentiate this? So as the name suggests, ST elevation MI. So when I do ECG, in case of ST elevation MI, there will be ST elevation.
Correct.
And it is a very simple rule that whenever there is cardiac injury, the biomarkers will increase. So in ST elevation of angina, there is cardiac injury, definite cardiac injury. So the cardiac biomarkers, which we normally, in hospital also, the first test to be done if anyone they suspect myocardial infarction, so they will rise. because
D-dimer.
either that or CKMB, troponin, they do very commonly. High sensitivity.
CKMD.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, CKMB.
Troponin.
Trop I and Trop T are very important. Then in some hospitals they are doing LDH also, and all those tests. So this ST elevation MI. So whenever there is injury, this biomarkers will rise. So in case of non-ST elevation MI, the patient will be having ST depression and not ST elevation. That's why the name non-ST elevation MI. So one is STEMI and one is non-STEMI. So name only gives a picture that what are the ECG changes associated.
बायोमार्कर्स में दोनों में पॉजिटिव आएंगे, उसमें खाली ECG में चेंजेस कहे में एक में होगा, एक में नहीं होगा.
Yes, ma'am. So because in both there is injury to the muscles, but in case of unstable angina, there is only ischemia and there is no injury.
मैं चली जाती हूँ.
So in unstable angina, there is no injury. There is only ischemia, so the biomarkers won't get elevated. ECG changes can be ST depression. So there is only ischemia, as in the figure also written ischemia only. There is only ischemia. So in unstable angina, there is only cardiac biomarkers don't get elevated.
Okay.
So moving on to this, I've just mentioned that this is how a ST elevation looks. So we can see that after the QRS wave, the ST is rising up along with T wave, and in this case the ST is going down. So yes, this is how they look on ECG. Then yes, what are the clinical features and investigations associated with heart attack? So what is important here is chest pain at rest is very relevant. But we need to be sure that because in diabetics, we have already discussed this before also, that in diabetics, sometimes they suffer from silent MI because of neuropathy associated. They won't suffer from chest pain. Then vomiting. So vomiting, even one episode of vomiting can be a symptom of MI. The reason behind is the inferior wall of the heart rests on, basically overlies the diaphragm over the part of stomach. So an inferior wall MI can only present as vomiting.
Okay.
And even epigastric pain for that matter.
Okay.
So in casualty, the dictum is any pain from mandible to umbilicus, do a ECG and rule out myocardial infarction first.
Okay.
So then the pain will be of long duration and it is progressive. We call it crescendo pain. And there is very interesting sign called as Levine sign. So what is Levine sign? The person will make a fist and will keep it on his chest. So because he is suffering from pain. So we call it Levine sign. And then if it is acute coronary syndrome causing sudden heart failure of left side or right side, then there will be specific clinical feature associated with left heart failure or right ventricular failure. So left heart failure, the patient can complain of hemoptysis, that is blood in sputum, immediately blood in sputum, or the patient can complain of breathlessness, sudden breathlessness. And right heart failure, the patient will complain of lower limb edemas, lower limb edema, right upper quadrant pain, liver congestion, prominent neck veins, elevated JVP, and all those things. And this is very important. Random blood sugar is very relevant for these patients because we have discussed before also that in a damaged heart, the source of energy is glucose. So anytime if patient is going towards hypoglycemia, we need to correct it.
Correct.
And hypoglycemia is also a cause of sudden cardiac arrest for that same reason.
Correct.
And then vital monitoring. Normally, yes, all the vitals should be monitored. That patient is not going towards tachycardias because we need to decrease the tachycardia because tachycardias will obviously cause trouble in case because they will increase the demand.
Correct.
Then ECG changes we have in basic we have already discussed that ST elevation and ST depression can be seen, and 2D echo has to be done for any hypokinesia of walls. And then these are the common biomarkers to be which are done, that is CKMB, troponin I and Trop T. So it is very important to know that the cardiac markers have increased or not, because if they have not increased, then we can be sure the patient suffered from only ischemia and not injury.
Correct.
sometimes it happens that ECG does not show any changes. It is only the biomarkers which are elevated. So that is also a red alert sign that the injury is happening somehow, the heart injury, cardiac injury.
Okay.
Then coming to treatment guidelines. So treatment guidelines. So there are multiple therapies available. So we need to decide that what therapy is appropriate for which patient. So this is the main part of the guidelines. So there are medical management, there are thrombolytic therapy, there is something called as intervention cardiology, which is done by cardiologists. That is primary percutaneous intervention, and then there is surgical management, that is coronary artery bypass grafting.
Correct.
We will read about them, about each in basic, so that at least we know that how the things are managed at what level. We'll discuss about each and everything, and we'll try to understand the concept of each. So coming to medical management. So each and every medical management, there is a reason why are we giving in an acute coronary syndrome patient. So there is a simple mnemonic which is called as MONAC.
Okay.
But some people also refer it as MONA. So this mnemonic is, first of all, the person should be made to rest and lie down. There are two reasons behind it. First of all, when the patient is in supine position, the renal perfusion improves.
Correct.
And secondly, the patient, the heart, it does not have to act against gravity. So the rest and the supine position is very important. Then second is IV morphine. The pain and anxiety should be reduced down, because for the same reason that pain and anxiety will increase the heart rate. Then oxygen, if only the patient is, the saturation is less than 90%. And then nitrates, because nitrates will decrease the preload of the heart. Then ANC refers for aspirin and clopidogrel. So this MONAC mnemonic is very important. These are the first line which are done. So if there is no morphine available, even a paracetamol will work for pain relief.
Okay.
So
and what is C represents? C represents anticoagulants.
Okay. Clopidogrel. So this loading dose. So this loading dose is very important, and it has to be remembered from the doses only, with the doses. So aspirin 325 mg, clopidogrel 600 mg, and 8 over 80 mg. So any patient where the plaque, the atheromatous plaque has not completely formed. So the moment patient goes into acute coronary syndrome and we suspect that the plaque is getting built and there is complete ischemia has yet not happened, there is still a golden period. Time is muscle. In case of heart muscle, the time is muscle. If we administer these three drugs, that is aspirin 325 mg, clopidogrel 600 mg, 8 over 80 mg, then we can slow down the plaque formation, and this will buy us more time so that the patient gets the intervention. So this comes in the first stage. So if I know a patient who is a known case of heart disease, maybe has some heart problem before only, or maybe has a report saying that he has already coagulated atherosclerotic muscle, or he's a long risk factors of hypertension, increased lipid levels since long, and now suffers of chest pain, not relieved with maybe on antacids. Then as a first aid, we can give this loading dose. There's no harm, and we can this will buy us more time till the time patient gets therapy, the actual therapy, the loading dose.
What is the golden time?
Yes, we have this concept called as door to needle time and door to balloon time. So the guidelines say that the needle is referred to as the needle is streptokinase therapy. The streptokinase therapy, that this thrombolytic therapy I mentioned. This thrombolytic therapy, so this door is the door of hospital. So the moment so first of all, there is a time of us reaching to the hospital. So that time should be less than 30 minutes.
Correct.
So faster it is better, but then we should try to reach at least before 30 minutes. So the simple rule is time is muscle. So the earlier we reach the hospital, the more muscle we can save.
Correct.
Then door to needle time is with respect to thrombolytic therapy, and door to balloon time is with respect to interventional cardiology, primary percutaneous intervention. So the door to needle time, the patient enters hospital and the time he gets the thrombolytic therapy, should be less than 30 minutes. This is a standard for good cardiology hospitals or any hospital. Their door to kneel time should be less than 30 minutes, or if the patient is being taken up for cardiological intervention, that is primary percutaneous intervention, the time should be less than 90 minutes from the moment the patient enters the hospital. So this is also a standard of to measure the standard of care in the cardiology wing in the hospital, that in how much time the patient has received his therapy. Then yes, we can give anticoagulation for the medical management, and yes, keeping an eye for complication is very important. Then patient is not going for any arrhythmia, not going for fibrillations, or if there is sudden cardiac arrest, then ACLS and BLS protocols have to be followed. Basic life support and advanced cardiac life supports. So if the moment patient suffers chest pain and we go to the hospital and it is because of acute coronary syndrome, loading dose has given, patient is calm, and the patient reaches hospital within 30 minutes and all the investigation has been done, then the mortality really comes down. So this is the where the first responder comes in picture. Then going on to, I'll just discuss each therapy in brief in a very crisp manner, then how these works. So we have basically three therapies which we want to discuss today: thrombolytic therapy, PCI, and CABG. So coming to thrombolytic therapy, there are multiple thrombolytics available, streptokinase, urokinase, alteplase, reteplase. They are also used in strokes, ischemic strokes associated with clots. So yes, the point which needs to be remembered is whenever the anticipated time to do a primary percutaneous intervention is more than 2 hours. So our door to kneel time should be less than 30 minutes, but if it exceeds 120 minutes and we are anticipating it that the patient will be able to get only PCI after 2 hours, maybe because a cardiologist is not available or for whatever the reason, maybe the hospital does not have a cardiology wing, then thrombolytic therapy is considered more superior, because it is better to get a treatment first rather than the late treatment, because time is muscle.
Yes.
So the advantage is it doesn't require a cardiologist. Even an emergency medicine physician equipped with cardiology knowledge can do this. It is just like infusing some drug. So the disadvantage is there is a possibility that it might fail. Then the person ultimately has to go for PCI. So in the first go only, if we are suspecting chest pain, we should reach a hospital where cardiology wing is available. Because if cardiology wing is not available, then we are basically wasting time.
Correct.
So the mechanism is just basic simple, that it converts the plasminogen into the plasmin, which degrades the fibrin into fibrin degradation products.
Correct.
So that's next to primary percutaneous intervention. So basically via radial artery or by femoral artery, we put a catheter and then we go and we just over the clot, we break it, and then we enlarge the balloon. So the name balloon therapy, and we leave a stent to maintain the patency of the vessel. And then the stent is of two types. It can be a bare metal stent and can be a drug-eluting stent. So drug-eluting stent will prevent restenosis. So they are superior. So there is a drug in the stent as only. So there is a drug inside the stent. So you keep releasing drug over the slow time, and that it will prevent restenosis and will help in recanalization. So going on to the last, that is CABG. So coronary artery bypass grafting is a procedure where PCI is not done, and there is triple vessel disease, that is left anterior descending, left circumferential, right coronary artery. All three are blocked, and the patient then the arteries have to be bypassed. There are thick clots. So then in the picture we can see that they take left internal mammary artery or maybe saphenous vein to create a bypass, and the perfusion is maintained. So this is a brief in CABG. And coming to the last guidelines, so this is where the summary comes. So if a patient is suffering from stable angina, that is the clot is very stable, then that is stable atheromatous plaque and only narrowing, and the patient is symptomatic only on exercise, then we go for medical management and we try to avoid the progression of the plaque. here I add one more point, that there are two things. To prevent the progression, we need to give medical management. So patient will be on long-term therapy, on aspirin, atorvastatin, and all the drugs containing antihypertensive after the procedure. And the procedure is just to relieve the blockage at that point of the time. Relieving the blockage does not reduces the progression. The progression will only be controlled using medical management. Then unstable angina is only medical management. Non-ST elevation MI, we decide for intervention based on there is something called as GRACE scoring. That scoring we need to do, and for ST elevation NY we have to go for intervention, either PCI, either thrombolytic or surgical. Based on the, and PCI is always preferred over thrombolytics. PCI is more superior. There are ultimately no contraindications. Only where there's triple vessel disease we do CABG, but thrombolytic therapy have many contraindications like active bleeding in the patient or maybe some surgery in past. Then we don't go for thrombolytic. So PCI is more superior. So we should always take a chest pain patient to a hospital where cardiology wing is present, not to a hospital where there's no cardiology wing, because the PCIs can only be done under cardiologist supervision. So then in the end, I will just finish the lecture with in brief about the complications of myocardial infarction. So there is sudden cardiac arrest, then we need to do BLS. If there is arrhythmia, then we go for ACLS guidelines, that is amiodarone, and maybe if there is sudden this pulseless electrical activity, we go with epinephrine. If there is acute heart failure, we give diuretics and beta blockers at that time, even before the surgery. Then if there is a ventricular aneurysm, pericarditis, we treat them accordingly. For embolism also. So these complications have to be managed, and we have to make sure that don't occur before the patient is taken for procedure or even thrombolytic therapy. So yes, this is I've tried to make myocardial infarction as brief as possible.
Simple as possible. That's right. Simple as possible.
I hope it was.
It has been absolutely great. I will try to trace one song for BLS. And I think, I will send it across to you so I can trace it. And then people like you can definitely just demonstrate initially what all steps are there. So tomorrow, what are we taking? We'll take stroke tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll take stroke tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay?